The call of Christ is epic, is what we're saying. But the question is, how do you just acknowledge, so please take that home with you, that for 1,500 years we trained traffic cops. This need to have auricular confession set up, we actually, do you see how we let a practice determine our ecclesiology and then our theology? You had to train confessors. You know how you became a priest, by the way, before the Council of Trent? Reformation. You lived in the house of your bishop. You lived around your bishop. Your bishop just sort of saw you and then decided to ordain you. But the book you were given in ordination, the Penitentiales Confessores, that's the book you were given. And it was a spreadsheet, for those of you that like that kind of thing. The sin, the penance. The sin. They came up with, reading this stuff is like, you think 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, this stuff, they came up with things you can't even imagine. Because that's what the priests needed to know. They knew that was the only point of contact. What does it mean to travel as a minister of the gospel for your life and a century of the church with a book called The Penitential Rite? But that was the attempt at standardization. After the Reformation, you have the creation of what we now call the modern seminaries. But you know what they were given? They're called the manuals, manus, because you carry them around by hand. And we went from 1600 to 1950 with the summary of Augustine, the summary, not Aquinas, the summary, for another 400 years. The idea is you've got to equip people. It was a step. Standardization was a step. But again, what did we lose? The original manuals of sin and the ones that came after them were the science of the licit and the illicit. I hear from Lisa that the way the original catechism was written in the Episcopal Church and the Advent Church is the same as what we call the Baltimore Catechism. They give you the answer and the question. You wonder where this style came from? This is a way to try to have education go with someone. Here are the questions and here are the answers. That's not an invitation. That has all the invitational quality of the tax code. So, we can't be driven by fear. And when we are driven by fear, we have to realize that that is where we must begin with the Lord. Peace be with you, my peace I give to you. I would go to the Eucharist 10 times a day if I could. Not because I'm a good person, but the reverse. That practice of taking the fault lines in your being that are created by separation from God and having them filled and flooded with bread and wine. Do that with your fear. Then realize we cannot call people to save the things of this world. St. Paul calls them second things. They're at best second things. And they're not epic. Stressful to-do lists are not epic. Grand to-do lists are not necessarily epic. And last, learn from the history of the church. It's hard to give the answer. Christianity is complicated. It's hard to communicate the full invitation to the full person of the Lord Jesus. But any other answer begins to minimize our faith, cut down our message, and turn us into a way to do something. There's something wrong with being utilitarian with teenagers about the faith. I do it all the time. But you do that to have Jesus, and Jesus does say, follow the commands. He even names them. He said, love God. He gives some examples. We have to name the law. The moral life is the railroad track to the pioneer of finding Christ. And you are a fool to think that you could just set a new way to get there and it's faster. That's what it means to look back and look forward. The moral life is essential to the Christian life. But as you know, it is not the Christian life. It's what the world speaks, so we have to speak a little bit of that language and talk about a living wage and structural racism. And we have to name these things morally. But we name them saying, we know what we know because we know a person of Christ who is restoring our humanity and restoring the humanity of the world. That's the invitation. Can you get that in your soundbite? I don't know. But the Reformation tells us that if we don't learn to stuff our soundbites, we will never stuff our pews. I just want you to know we have a couple of these wonderful pieces of fabric that a friend of ours has given us pictures of. So when you see these are our slides of beauty. Lisa, but what is epic ministry? I just said how important it is, and here's the professor. this table.
So welcome. So the Once and Future Church, this notion that we can and we will and we do live into the mission of God is an incredibly exciting, scary, messy, fabulous opportunity. And those of us in this room, as we said last night, those of us who are committed to formation and education know more about living in those spaces, I think, than many other people in the church. Even we, though, as close as we are to being on the epic journey, to inviting others into it, even we, enlightened as we may be, can really get stuck in the once, in the fear, in the way it was done, or the way it should be done. And so what happens when we ourselves, with all of our good intentions, really do get stuck? When we get stuck focused on a particular place, a particular program, a particular building, a particular something that we're trying to invest our energy and our time in to maintain, instead of building a holistic community following Jesus. What are some of those simple examples that we all know? Our houses of God can become very ornate museums. They can become precious places that are beautiful and have wonderful stories. But instead of using those stories to engage people in reflection about the living God, we tell stories about the past. We tell stories about the people who paid for them. We tell stories who are wonderful people, but where was Jesus in their life? Where was the story that they bring into that space and invested their time, energy, and money, lived out today among the people who are now blessed to be in that same edifice? Our ministries can become activities that are designed to entertain, commodities that we consume, and we begin to worry more about numbers than about souls and lives that we're spending our time with. Our professional church workers, those of us who have the privilege of working for a salary, for money in the church, ordained and lay, we can find ourselves cruise directors, people who are more in charge of other people's happiness and their satisfaction than we are about walking alongside the journey that they are living in relationship to God. We can feel that a day has not gone well because we didn't please somebody, when in fact perhaps not being pleased is the restlessness of their spirit wrestling with God. Christian formation in our best intentions can also become episodic. It can become just a series of fragmented, if well-intentioned, efforts that are scattered perhaps across the year, across a lifetime. These great high mountain moments, these moments of fearlessness that are not well woven into that long journey of the lifelong walk with Jesus. So we put a lot of energy into a big event, and there's no follow-up. We do a great launch of a new website, but we don't sustain it. We invite people to follow our blog, and we stop writing. You know, all of those possibilities that start well and fizzle out. So danger, it's very real, even for us who kind of get it, and who have great resources to tap into. If you remember the video from last night, the Apple ad, what will your verse be? Some invitations, some transactions can be so attractive that they really do verge on inviting us into epic experience. They can really invite us to begin to feel as if we are lending a verse to something that matters. Have any of you begun to follow some of the Amazon feedback comment sections on products that they sell? We just about lost it the other day when we started reading the whole flow of the feedback for the Haribo sugar-free gummy bears. You know what we're talking about. If you don't.
If you have trauma around gastric issues, this is not your thing. But if that's not a scary place for you, the reviews written on what the Haribo
sugar-free gummy bears
do to a human person.
The writers clearly want their verse in lights.
One man started out, the one Lisa read to me, the one man started out saying, I brought my son to a basketball game or something, talking about the epic story of having a small child eating them on their, and she and I were getting all nervous because we knew where the story was going, that they, got to the crowded place where they sat down, and then he started, I'm like, no, don't eat the gummies! And we're reading this review And the story was horrible. This was our reading.
So, people want, people lead, people are finding their way to places to participate in narratives that are building momentum, that are building engagement, that are not, in my opinion and our opinion, inviting them to something of ultimate proportion that is transformative. Lots of our churches do a great, great job, I think, of creating Jesus fans. People who really like the idea of Jesus. People who will come alongside of our activities, our events, our programs. They might even be Jesus fanatics. Now, in the Episcopal Church, we're not so often the evangelical fundamentalist Jesus fanatic, but we might be the Anglo-Catholic fanatic. We might be the one who really likes a particular traditional piece of music. We might be the person who only will go to worship services that have loud drums. Whatever it is, we can be fanatical. And what is my concern is that our mission as Christian formation educators and leaders is not to create fans and fanatics. It's to create people who are genuine followers of Jesus Christ. Following Jesus does not look like fanaticism. Following Jesus is a quiet and faithful practice that we do our best to honor from the moment we wake up in the morning until the moment we put our heads back on the pillow at the end of the day. And we don't always know that we're doing it well, but we know that we're working toward it. So what does work? What is it that does help us as formation leaders build these holistic communities in which other people are genuinely invited into the journey of walking with Jesus toward the resurrection? What are some of the things that really matter? Baptism. It doesn't just happen, sprinkle, 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 now you're a child of God. Baptism is actually this really radical beginning of a journey that we call the spiritual life. So when we baptize people, we have to believe that we are committed to walking with them, and they with us, in working out their God-given vocations. We shouldn't be baptizing people who don't know what they want to do on the other side of the event. We honestly are not helping people find the epic journey by having baptisms of convenience. There are many and many, many good, constructive pastoral practices to receive a person's hunger for baptism and redirect it to a place that would actually satisfy the yearning of their heart before they are ready for that significant initiation. Let's not cheapen what it is that marks us as Christ's own forever. Then in that baptism, we need to pay attention to the language we're using. We need to realize that when we make our promises, and we say, and we re-say when we witness others, I will with God's help, we are truly entering a story. We are saying, I will move toward this ultimate goal that God has for my life, and I will trust that God will be by my side. Now, if we take I will and with God's help seriously, then we need to help people develop the practices of discernment, of prayer, of being still with God. How do I know if God's helping me if I can't hear God? How do I know if God could possibly be in my life if I have nothing in my life that makes space for God to show up? I will with God's help. What else works? Church leaders like you and I reconciling our honest dis-ease with the Great Commission. With Matthew 28, we are told very clearly that we are sent out into the world to make disciples of all nations. That's messy. That's hard. You have to reconcile for yourself, theologically, how you understand your call to be an evangelist. But what I can tell you is that what's not working is this nice, awkward, tentative, come closer, I love you, I love God, oh no, you don't have to believe anything, come closer, oh, it's okay, if you don't like that part, just don't say it. We all have doubts. That's part of our rich tradition. Let the doubts be shown, but find your conviction.